A pleasant day to you, everybody who is joining us wherever in the world you are. We welcome you to this our discussion. Uh, I would like to start by saying, when Africa found its independence, the joy and source of happiness and encouragement came from their liberation movements. These were, I would say they brought you know joy, happiness to a lot of people, and people talked very highly of what they would achieve. And after so many years, when you now look back or turn back to look at what these liberation movements have achieved, a lot of people would be very disappointed because they, instead of breeding democracy, one man one vote, they have turned into a group or a band of bandits that have now stuck together to spur their own missions and their own self-interest. So recently, a delegation from Namibia came, a liberation movement called Swapo came and paid a courtesy call to Zanu PF. And, they were discussing various tactics as they are also going into an election sometime in November. And, after that, the Swapo was, praising Zanu PF, saying Zanu PF is an example of, a fight against Western mechanizations. I don't know if you read the article. What do you think about it?
Thank you, Benjamin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the listeners. I think the whole meeting, the whole discussion, and the praise singing was to be expected. SWAPO is the ruling party in Namibia, and it has maintained its monopoly on power on the basis that it is the party that liberated the country, just like ZANU PF has done. And in this particular case, SWAPO is part of SADC. Sorry, Namibia is part of SADC. And so they would know that Mnangagwa last year rigged the elections. This has nothing to do with the West. And yet, here we go. He is the bulwark against Western machinations. What machinations? It's ridiculous. I think our failure to understand the problem is really disappointing. I totally agree with you. While these liberation movements believed and made the people believe that they were fighting for freedom, human rights, human dignity of the blacks, to end white colonial oppression, what they were really fighting for is for them to be the new oppressor, period. And now they've used the excuse that they are keeping out the West to justify their continued oppression of the blacks, the black people, of their fellow black men. It's pathetic. SWAPO, like you correctly say, is facing elections in November. In Namibia, although its performance has been much better than Zimbabwe in terms of holding free, fair, and credible elections, it is not really a healthy and functioning democracy. And that point must be made. And no doubt they are hoping that they will win the November elections by hook or by crook. It is a pity. It really is a pity. It's really disappointing to hear such nonsense.
I agree with you. I would have thought, by now they would have moved on from the blame game to something of more substance or towards growth, at least. But it seems as if, they have decided to blame all the wars that befall Africa or Southern Africa on the West. And yet we really do know that, it is a problem with good governance that is non-existent in most cases in these liberation movements, because they themselves, instead of being people oriented, people driven, because they were founded on people's blood that went to fight wars against imperialism, they have turned that to now quench their own thirst, their thirst for power, their hunger for power. And now, since they believe that since they fought the war, they now have that divine right to rule, no questions asked, just take it or leave it. I get that this is exactly how they think the world should work, you know and unfortunately, people are starting to wake up to this. I mean, we have the South Africa, for example. They just came from an election and the people spoke, right? And they spoke against their liberation movement. Why is it? And instead of them learning as liberation movements, they still blame. They blame what happened in South Africa is sad. How can that be sad when the people spoke? You know, you should be happy to say, there was democracy. The people spoke. Unfortunately, they spoke against, our one of our sister, movements. What can we learn from what happened in South Africa if you are really concerned about each other's welfare going forward, right? That should have been a learning curve. Take that in your stride and better yourselves. But you find now they say what happened in South Africa is 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 very bad. How can that be bad? Sometimes, these movements, I really do think that they think that it is their God-given right to rule and rule, no questions asked, like I said.
Well, we are looking at the map of Southern Africa there with the democracy index measured from 0 if you're an autocratic country to 10 if you're a healthy and functioning democratic country. As you can see there, Botswana is one of the few countries in the SADC region that have persistently held not perfect, but nearly perfect, free, fair, and credible elections. And so they score 7.73. South Africa, that is the legacy of the iconic leader Nelson Mandela. He really left that country with healthy and functioning democratic institutions. As much as the successive ANC governments have not been democratic, they have nonetheless failed to subvert the system. So he still had a fairly independent judiciary. The police, the army, and so forth have remained independent. And so the May elections were free, fair, and credible. And so they scored 7.05 points. Namibia, there you can see it's been scoring 6.52. But up to now, I think it's no secret that ANC has supported regimes with a liberation war past. But with ANC losing its majority this last May, 29th of May, that has got governments like Swapo in Namibia really worried. And I think this causing up to Zanu PF, calling the Zanu PF dictatorship the bulwark against Western machinations, could be the first signs that Namibia or that Swapo is not committed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. So it will not be surprising at all if we find that the November elections would not be free, fair, and credible in Namibia. And so their 6.52 score on the democratic index is likely to be compromised. And Mnangagwa is the incoming SADC chairperson. And no doubt the delegation was sent there to start causing up with him so that after rigging the Zimbabwe elections himself, he'll be very sympathetic to letting Namibia get away with it. So instead of promoting good democratic practices, Mnangagwa, what he's doing now is the exact opposite. By his rigging elections and SADC doing nothing about it, has opened the door for other SADC countries to compromise on free, fair, and credible elections. I think that is the tragedy of SADC and of having individuals like Mnangagwa taking over the chairmanship of the regional body.
And I would just like to support what you have just said by quoting, a statement from what one of the SWAPO, delegates said. It says, and I will quote, "We are now heading for the November election. ZANU PF is, of course, a team to be reckoned with. They have the expertise and they have knowledge, and therefore we cannot get into elections without talking to ZANU PF." Now, here is a statement that is made on the back of ZANU PF coming from an election that the SADC Observer Mission, stated itself that the election were flawed, were illegal, and did not meet, any international standards or even the local standards. So one would fail to understand how then now a Namibia would actually be heaping praise to say ZANU PF is the team to be reckoned with when it comes to election. They themselves cannot go into an election without first having to consult ZANU PF. What good will they be learning from somebody that has actually failed their own democratic election, their own democratic process? I find it very absurd that you would want to learn from somebody that is a failure themselves, unless you want to learn exactly how they go about to failing those processes. And I think, a statement like this coming from one of the SADC nations and one of the nations that had, a say in the past election, Zimbabwe election, I would practically say, it's logic to think that, they were very much, in the in endorsing those elections. They were for endorsing the elections, the Zimbabwe election. I mean, if you don't see anything wrong with the report, and then you come back a few months later down the line and you say ZANU PF is a team to be reckoned with when it comes to elections, and you know that ZANU PF has had elections that have been contested for the past so many years, that just, for me, sounds alarm bells. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, like I said, I think it's absolutely utterly nonsense. What is it wittering about? He is trying to pretend here that ZANU PF is the bulwark against Western machinations. What Western machinations? ZANU PF rigged the 2023 elections. That has nothing to do with the West. The West has just been used, and the sanctions that were imposed on the regime, as an excuse for rigging elections. So I think it's to be dismissed with the utter contempt that it rightly deserves. I think Swapo is heading for the November elections and is worried that they may lose power. And now that South Africa's ANC has lost its influence, they are really worried that they may not be able to get any meaningful support if they rigged their own elections. And this is, I think, at the heart of it. I was just going to play a video of the ANC Secretary General being given a straight dress down for having supported ZANU PF in the past.
Our international relationship is going to really be based off what is good for South Africa, and ensure that these countries respect the rule of law. We will not be associated with dictators and with countries that actually does not respect the human rights of their own countries. Not that we will interfere directly in their affairs, but we will make it really very clear. Like, I can give an example that I always use. It's ZANU PF in Zimbabwe. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible, not difficult, for Action SA to have relationships with ZANU PF. Looking at their history, making Zimbabweans to be all over the world, including being here in South Africa, creating a massive challenge for us in South Africa. Zimbabwean people deserve to be in their own country. Got a beautiful country, lots of potential, but unfortunately, when you have a party like the Zanu PF, which are friends of the ANC, I really find it difficult for a current government to be associated with the Zanu PF. I mean, it's beyond imagination.
I think that dress down said it all. The gentleman on the left side there was the ANC Secretary General, who had supported ZANU PF. And in November 2022, ANC had come up with a party resolution saying that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. And when ANC lost its majority and was forced to go into a coalition, here was a coalition partner, making it abundantly clear that that kind of relationship will not be tolerated in the coalition. And he could see that he was really uneasy because he was now being called out. I think our Swapo friends are feeling the same heat. Thank you, Benjamin. That's my closing remark.
Thank you. So, for my closing, I would say, I think if Southern Africa as a whole is to move forward and to make strides, even in terms of development, in terms of democracy, I think it is time where you point out a spade as a spade to correct those that are interfering with democratic processes. This of the liberation movements thinking that it is their divine right to rule and to rule unconditionally and no questions asked is something of the past. And I'm glad that South Africa, especially the ANC, they're one of the most vocal in terms of support for ZANU PF, got a wake-up call. And I'm hoping this would spread throughout all Southern Africa, and not only just Southern African countries, but throughout the world, for those countries that have, dictators, to say, the writing is on the wall. People are getting to know that, these excuses, these feeble excuses that we make day in and day out to say, whenever we fail, we blame somebody else, is now, is now known as a poor excuse, and people are not buying into it. And I'm hoping that this is the direction that even us as citizens we will take going forward, to realize that some of these wars that we are going through, the hard times that we are going through, even as a country as Zimbabwe, it's got absolutely nothing to do with other countries or other players outside our country. It starts with us. We need to fix this mess. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. We hope that you will join us tomorrow, same time. Thank you and good night.
Good night.